kind of go through. So first thing is life of Shakespeare. Never university educated. There's the mystery of his lost years. He's an uneducated outsider of London that frustrated other playwrights. The reason I want to bring this up is, right, a lot of people think, he's really, that Shakespeare guy was so sophisticated, and you have him as the upper intelligentsia of British class. And he was just a normal kind of dude. So a lot of people miss that. He made a name for himself mostly with comedies and histories. Onset of a plague and death of Queen Elizabeth spurred an era of writing tragic plays. If you want to be curious more about how plagues affected him, you could read the article. It's at the end of the presentation. His final plays were known as mystery plays. Family cost of his masterpieces. Cost to his family because he was away a lot of times in London having to write. Okay. All right, going to question 2. Oh, let's see. I see. Connection to the second principle. Don't worry too much about the bard's real life. This right here with the mystery of the lost years, Hollywood loved to come out with every few years a new interpretation of Shakespeare and da-da-da, and Shakespeare was this, et cetera, et cetera. Don't really worry about who was the real Shakespeare and all these things. Most of it is just conjecture and speculation, and it's not really helpful. What we know from Shakespeare is a few details. Right. Okay. Now, question number 2. So this is looking at Elizabeth and the Jacobin theater. So the Elizabeth era, the reign of Elizabeth marks held together religious strife between Catholics and Protestants. So you're going through some of the Reformation in England here, and she managed to hold together them, which was amazing because if you know anything about kind of European history, there was lots of bloodshed, and catalyzed the growth of England. So Elizabeth comes along, basically she's able to maintain peace, and she's able to maintain flourishment so that they can actually grow as a nation. Instead of being kind of a backwater country, there's something that's strong. Now, their theater. They had to be very careful with political, religious questions. It was a theater in the round, 3 tiers of galleries, and the groundlings would stand. So you get the, 3 tiers here, kind of. The groundlings are those people that down here that pay to be there. So it's like the mosh pit. Okay. Boys played female parts, rivalry between theater troops. Oftentimes they would even try to bash, or they might even have a prologue that condemns the work of the rival playwright, but they would kind of have a little fun with that. Now, big thing is Shakespeare's making his mark at exactly the right time for English history and the language. He comes along at the moment just when England is really coming together to be a strong nation. And he becomes that poet that speaks for that nation. Just like Homer does for the Greeks, just like Virgil, does for the Romans. Right. Question 3. What is similar or different about modern day theaters? Disruptions of groundlings. They were pretty wild, and if they didn't like what you did, they would throw food at you or do other things. And there was also performance in the daylight. So very much Shakespeare's humor needed to be bawdy and oftentimes have lots of jokes, because if you did not please these fans, right, it would get a little bit out of control. Okay? Kind of the comparison we can imagine is if you're at a concert, right, and the head musician, right, doesn't manage kind of the audience there. Okay, another difference. Actors only giving cue lines, minimal rehearsal, less of director, more about the company of actors. We're going to talk more about what this means with the actors only giving cue lines, but basically they would never, ever, ever, ever have a full script. Okay? They didn't have, printing things was very difficult. So, what's similar? Well, rise of the popular actor as a star or celebrity. So we start to see some people kind of rise up in the ranks as these become the famous actors of the area, and we get the star and celebrity that follows it. So, connection to third principle, especially with this, right, Shakespeare's impact living on today, I would say with that similarity of the star or celebrity. Right, number 4. Write down some words and expressions invented by Shakespeare. These are a variety of different ones that I wrote down. You could write down. But the idea, most of our language, right? A lot of these phrases that we take as normal, he, right, invented, they are adapted, they came up with. So we're in debt to him as an English speaker. Another way of saying it, connection to third principle, what you speak is what he set down. Respect. Right, 5. Okay? So going through the categories. Well, Shakespeare also, though, knew that he'd need to develop certain styles of plays. History plays, in particular, what they did is they transformed England's history into a great drama. They focus on grand, timeless nature of things, not accuracy. History plays trace the sequence of events that led to the United England. Could resemble more or less tragedy and comedy. So it could be more tragedy or comedy, depends on which one. But basically, he becomes along, right? And he does, okay, what the kind of Lin-Manuel has done in some ways with Alexander Hamilton's story, right, of putting it in this great dramatic piece. He puts the stories of their kings in the forming of their nation. Right, so again, right, Shakespeare coming at the right time. Okay, tragedy and conflict, or tragedy and comedy. Tragedy, the big difference with these is how conflict happens. So tragedy, the conflict leads to the downfall of a hero, individual, or communities. Normally, tragedy looks at human nature, hunger for romantic love, money, or power. It's looking at kind of these big themes or big topics. Comedy, it's not funny. So don't think tragedy is just bad things and comedy is just ha-ha. But it's that life is more hopeful, it's cyclical, it's ongoing, right? That we learn from our mistakes, we move on. Whereas in tragedy, the big difference is the resolution, right, means you die. So comedy is all about how the conflict is resolved, okay, versus tragedy. How is the conflict resolved? That's what you need to ask. Romance, I don't talk too much about that, but Shakespeare, the romance and mystery plays, he basically started to kind of change and go move away from these kind of forms and did different ones towards the later part of his career. Shakespeare improving on the work of others. Why do I say that for the later principles? We'll talk more about this next week, but, right, obviously, you guys know this, tragedy and comedy came from who? Oh, resounding answer, I heard it. Yeah, the Greeks. Okay? Now, improvising on it, he's building on that, changing it, and then introducing and innovating something new, which is kind of the romance ones, or I would say kind of more as mystery ones, which they don't, sometimes they're tragedies and comedies mixed together.